I'd like to start with, I'm not the boss of anyone. So I always joke about that. But the reality is that I hope our conversation today can be fun and productive and most of all useful for you. And I also hope that this isn't going to be just me talking and more a chance for us to have a conversation about the idea of a supervisor-supervisee relationship. I have some tips and some tools that I have learned over my career that I hope will be helpful to you. But most importantly, I want to make sure that y'all are getting out of our talk today what it is that you came here to learn or to hear about. So to get us kind of thinking about these issues, I'd like for you just to take a minute and reflect on your most effective supervisor-employee relationship. So think about, it could be your current position or a position in the past, but where have you felt like you've had the most effective supervisor-employee relationship? I would hum the Jeopardy theme song, but that's probably not helpful. So okay, does everyone have something in mind about that experience? A few words that might describe it, yes? Can I get a thumbs up? That is the universal symbol for yes. Okay, so thinking about that experience, just look to your neighbor and share those 3, 4, 5, 10 words about that experience. And go. Okay, so is anyone willing to share for yourself, not for the person that you shared with, but for yourself, what some of those descriptors are of the most effective supervisor-employee relationship that you've had? What are some of the ways that you would describe that relationship?
Professionalism.
Okay, professionalism.
They allow autonomy.
Okay, autonomy. Yes.
Clear direction, communication.
Okay. Behind.
Communication, trust.
Okay. Good. Shelley? Respect. Okay. Anyone else? Trust. Yeah. Mentorship. Good. Anything else? Okay, so I hope that as you think about our conversation today, that those words sort of stick with you about your most effective relationships. And I hope that we can spend some time thinking about what our responsibilities are both as supervisors and employees, because this is a two-way street, right? Not just a one-way one. And I don't have a lot of content necessarily in the slides. I think of myself more as a facilitator than a presenter. So I tend to use less words and try to think more about what these things mean to me. And the word excellence came to mind first, because the reality is the best way that we can work with our supervisors is by being excellent in the job that we have right now. And I often get asked, particularly by young professionals as they're starting out their careers, of how do I get promoted? You know, how do I get to be the vice president of student affairs? Or how do I get to be the director of this or that? Or how do I, whatever their aspiration is. And the truth is that it starts by being really good at your job. And as an employee, the best thing that you can do to start that relationship out is by being excellent at the job that you've been tasked with. Now, some of you may think on that question, say, well, I don't really know what my job is, right? And that's a really good question. That's a really good question. And hopefully that's a conversation that you can start with your supervisor, but also rely on things like your job description and other people who are doing jobs like yours to try to understand the work that you've been tasked with. But most importantly, to have some sort of common agreement with your supervisor about what it would look like if you were being really excellent at what you did. And that means, starting with you, what does it look like for you to be excellent at your job? And I'll ask for volunteers because this is a participatory process today. So if you felt like you were being really excellent at your job, what would that look like?
High quality work.
Okay, high quality work. So you can define what quality looks like in your area, okay? What else? Shelley?
Continued education, not getting stuck in that road.
Good, so always trying to learn, always trying to improve. Good, what else?
Task completed before deadline.
Yeah, so some of us have tasks, right? Things that have to be done. And getting those things done and get them done in a timely fashion or ahead of time. Good. What else?
Team player.
Team player, yeah. So we got a problem. How are we going to solve it together? Good. What else? If you were being excellent, what does that look like, Karen?
Quantifiable results.
Okay. Okay, so in some of our jobs, we literally have a moment of clarity that says to us something profound. But the idea that we do have expectations or real targets that we're expected to meet. Good, good. So if you aren't sure what excellence looks like for you in your job, then that's a great place to start a conversation with your supervisor. So that might be discomforting in some way to open up that conversation. My advice is that that happens best not in the formality of like a performance review or some very structured setting, but more in an informal conversation about, hey, if all of us were working together how you want us to, what would that look like? And for me specifically, what would that look like? The next idea is to get to know each other. Now, how many of you are in roles where you have worked for, let's say, more than a year? Okay, so maybe 2/3 of you. How many of you are what you would consider a newbie, a new person in your role? Okay, just a couple of folks. All right, so for some of you, you may feel like, I really have a good grasp on who my supervisor is. If you believe that, raise your hand. Okay, good, good. So for those of you who don't, that's not an indictment or a failure. It's simply a question. I need to keep one of those. Yeah, they're all the same. So the idea of communication, who said communication in that first part? Thank you. So the idea of communication as the key part of a relationship is obvious, right? If you think about your partnership with your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, whomever, your children, your neighbor. All of those relationships are affected by the way we communicate with each other. And having that open communication with your supervisor is the benchmark, the cornerstone of an effective relationship. So what's coming around is a list of conversation starters. And just for my own information, how many of you also are supervising other people? Okay, good number of you, good. So as you think about these conversation starters, as a supervisor, I have also used a document very similar to this with the people that I supervise to get feedback from them about their experiences and how they need to be supported and recognized and so forth. But this is for you to work with your supervisor. So this is a list of a few questions that hopefully can get you to understand one another a little bit more. And I used more instead of better because most of our relationships aren't on the polar opposites of good and bad. What we're trying to do is to have a better relationship with our supervisor. And that's what I hope these conversation starters can help you with. One of the key things here is the first question. And if you can answer this question without a doubt right here and now, I applaud you. Because knowing how your supervisor makes decisions and how they use the information that you give them is very important. And in fact, I can't overstress that. Knowing the way in which your supervisor needs to receive whatever it is that you're giving him or her is crucial. And I'll give you an example. I'm a student affairs person, born and raised. I've never done anything else. If anyone were to ask you, they would tell you that I'm a touchy-feely person. I talk about my feelings. I like to hug people. I just as soon cry as laugh. There are lots of other things that describe who I am as a student affairs person. Well, through the bulk of my career, I worked for student affairs people. And so they knew that that was who I was. And that was comforting, right? I always reported to another student affairs person. Well, in my last job before I came to Mississippi State, I reported to the provost. And the provost was not a student affairs person. In fact, he was an engineer. And so let that sink in for a minute. Of everything that you might think of about an engineer, he was an engineer. And it took me literally one day to figure out how I needed to communicate with him. In our very first one-on-one, I came to him and I was describing, all the great things that were happening in the division and all of the ideas that we had about what we wanted to do and these great programs that we were going to implement. And he said to me, any guesses? Any guesses? The budget question came later, but
Send me an email.
no, not that either. How is that going to impact student retention? How are those things that you're talking about going to change our bottom line? How is that going to impact the students that we have on our campus? How is that going to impact the students that we're trying to recruit to campus? And he didn't want me to say, oh, well, all of our national data shows that students who are involved in these things have higher retention. No. That was not the question he was asking. He was asking, at that place, how is what you're going to do impact our students? And that was an answer I couldn't give him. I didn't have the data, and I hadn't done my homework, mostly because I didn't know that was homework I needed to do. And so I learned from the first day with him that he was always going to support every idea that we had as long as I could tie it back to how does this fit into our efforts to support student success, get them graduated. And we had a great relationship because I could adapt my student affairs, touchy-feely stuff to what he needed as a scientific thinker. I will also never forget him getting his calculator out in a meeting after I had presented him with an Excel form because he didn't trust that the Excel calculation was correct. And so that was an important lesson too, to always check, always back up that what you are giving to your supervisor is correct. And not just you think it's correct, but it really is correct. And we all have those moments. Some of you may not be huggers or touchy-feely people, and so that's not a thing for you to overcome. But it's important to recognize what your supervisor needs in order to make decisions. And I've learned the value of data, for example, in the overall university's perspective. I don't go to meetings now without having things to back up the perspectives that I want to bring forward. And when I say things, I mean data, budget, all of those measurable points of information. So having that with your supervisor, and it could be different for all of you, but make sure that you understand how they need to receive information in order to make decisions. And to be honest, I'm all about the full, honest approach with people, and you just ask. So, Trey, what do I need to tell you in order for you to be able to make this decision? What information can I provide? And what a great entry point into your conversation. There are lots of other things on here. Are there certain times of the day that you prefer to hear from me? Some of us are morning people, some of us are not. And, you know, the delivery of detailed information for me is better in the afternoon than in the morning because my brain is caffeinated enough by midday that I can really take grasp. But getting to know your supervisor and when he or she is best able to hear what you have to say. I also particularly like the question of what is it that's happening right now for you that I can help relieve? And that's an important question, and maybe all of you would say, gosh, I would never say something like that to my boss. I'm sure you can find another framing of that, but every supervisor needs people around them that are willing to pick up things that might have appeared out of nowhere. And we all have those issues, right? Mississippi State is faced with one right now as we think about the state budgets. And so everyone needs creative thinkers around them to say, hey, I know that this is happening, here's an idea. Clearing the path. I like lawnmowers, I like the grass, I don't want to push the lawnmower, literally, but I like the idea that the role of a supervisor is about clearing the path, right? It's about how do I take your ideas, your concepts, and help clear the way so that those things can happen. And your supervisor is your biggest advocate. But your supervisor can't be your advocate if you don't tell them what's going on. And some of us, somebody used the word autonomy earlier. I don't remember who that was. the idea of autonomy is awesome, right? We all want to be masters of our own fate, captains of our own ships, or whatever other metaphors you can use. But the reality is that we work in a team environment. And so your supervisor can be your advocate if he or she knows what's up. But if he or she doesn't know what's up and doesn't know what you're working on, it's going to be really hard for him or her to advocate for you at the next level, whatever that may be. And I also think about this idea of advocacy, particularly for those of you who work in areas where you're trying to make a lot of changes. And I hope you don't mind a conversation that we've had about, you're trying to develop a new policy or trying to change the way a unit works in terms of its processes. Guess what? Your supervisor can be a big help in that, because if he or she can support your position, maybe that will be helpful to others who may be resisting that position. So use your supervisor as an advocate. Does anyone have an example of where that's worked for you? This is the participation portion of today's program. So, and I need a sip of water. So, any examples of that? Okay, well, here's my challenge to you. You be the example of that for one of your staff members. For those of you who supervise folks, be the example of how to be a good advocate. All the student affairs people know that I'm a dog person, so this is the surprise face, right? This is not the face you want to see on your supervisor. Right? So, supervisors and surprises do not go together. They are not related to each other. They are not supported by each other. So, in all honesty, I think one of the most important things that we all have an obligation to do is to make sure our supervisors aren't surprised by something that's happening in your area of control. And one of the important sort of beginning questions that you ask your supervisor is, what kinds of things do you want to know about? And having the opportunity to have a discussion with them about issues that they need to be informed about. In our shop, it's pretty easy. I don't want to be surprised about a student issue that you've talked to general counsel about, that you've talked to the police about, or that you've talked to a parent about. I don't want to be surprised about a budget issue where you've spent more than you were supposed to, and I don't want to be surprised about something that the president is going to get a call about before I get a call about. And so those are kind of the general parameters that we operate within, and there are a lot of things that could happen that are in those parameters, but the truth is, the best thing I can say is to be direct, share the facts, and not get lost in the details. Share the facts and not get lost in the details, and worry less about positioning yourself as not having done something wrong than about sharing this issue that could be of concern to your supervisor. And that can be really hard, right? Because our human nature is like self-preservation. Like, I want to do everything I can to communicate that all of this that's happening wasn't because of something I did wrong. But that, in the moment, honestly isn't important. What is important is sharing the facts of what happened or what you perceived happened or what you might be concerned about happening. And then talk with your supervisor about, are there steps that we need to take to mitigate these issues? But surprises, no one really likes them. Like, I know there are people who are like, oh, I love to be surprised. Yeah, if you're getting like a diamond ring or a new car, awesome surprise. Won the lottery, awesome surprise. HGTV calls you and says you won the dream home. Awesome, that is what I'm hoping for. I register every day. You know, there are surprises that are awesome. These surprises, not awesome. So to the degree that you can let go of whatever it is that causes us to not want to share and just share, that's good. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, gosh, I don't want to over-communicate. There are over-communicators in the world. We may be some of them in this room. I tend to be an over-communicator. But the truth is, I've always felt like I would rather communicate too much than not enough. And if my supervisor doesn't want to know something, he or she will tell me. And that's sort of the way that I've worked in my career. And I think you have to figure that out with your supervisor. There may be things that your supervisor just doesn't want to know about, and that's okay. But more than likely, more information is better than less. And I do love these pups. They're so cute. Okay, so this next topic about bringing something to the table. This is the idea that the relationship is in two directions. So I think sometimes we think about our relationship with our supervisor as our supervisor having all of the knowledge and wisdom and the answers, and he or she is going to impart those upon us, and then we are going to thusly know what I need to do for that day or week or month or year, whatever the case is. Most of the time, that's not true. Now, some of you are saying, Regina, you do not know my supervisor. That is exactly true. And okay, great. I will accept that there are supervisors who prefer that relational mode. But most supervisors are looking for a two-way relationship where you are coming to the table with content, ideas, questions, concerns, and they are providing you feedback, information. Maybe they're giving you a context that you didn't know about at the university level or the political level. Whatever the case may be, the truth is that that is a two-way street. So you have to come to the table as much as they have to come to the table. As Daryl and I were preparing for our talk today, he was sharing with me one of the tips from the 360-Degree Leadership book by John Maxwell that talked about for every 30 minutes in a meeting with your supervisor that you should be prepared for 60 minutes. You should be preparing for 60 minutes. Did I get that right, Daryl? Okay, thank you. Thank you. So the idea is that you have to come to the meeting or to the conversation with stuff and not expect that your supervisor is going to have all the stuff for you. And again, maybe in your area it doesn't work that way, but I think for 99% of cases, your supervisors are expecting you to have ideas, to have feedback, to give feedback. And mostly when your supervisor says, Jermaine, what do you think about this? They aren't just asking you that for the heck of it, like they really want to know. What do you think about this? Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Do you have a better idea? All of those are possible. And then, of course, our pathway is the idea that your success is their success. And that's true. And it's both directions. Your supervisor's success is also your success. And sometimes I do think, we all get caught up in the idea of who gets credit. And for some of us, that's more important, right? We have the need to be recognized. We have the need to get credit for what we do. And for some of us, that's less important. But the truth is, your supervisor's success is tied directly to yours. Just like your success is tied directly to them. So working together to make sure that you are supporting what they need and also contributing to the greater good of the department, the unit, the program, et cetera, is really critical. The other thing I'd say about this is some of you may be in roles that you feel like this is my career job, that you are at a place that you hope to remain through the end of your work life. And in which case I say, awesome, do the job that you have and do it excellently. But for some of you, you may want to have other roles. And one of the forgotten ways that your supervisor can be helpful to you is for you to tell them that. For you to say, Jacob to say, gosh, I really would like to be able to do this at some point in my career. And if I were Jacob's supervisor, I wouldn't be thinking, oh my gosh, Jacob wants to leave, blah, blah, blah. Instead, what I would be thinking is, okay, how can I make sure that Jacob is getting the experiences that he's going to need in order to be able to do that thing? And that happens in lots of ways. And maybe it's not even about the next job, but just an experience that you want to have. Like, oh my gosh, Karen, this is for you. I really want to be able to lead a study abroad trip. So I'm putting that into the universe there. And I'm just kidding. Okay, yes. So, this idea, though, that if there are things that you want to do to grow professionally, to state those things with your supervisor, because he or she can help you to get on committees, to get, somebody said, Shelley, I think, mentioned continuing education. Whatever those resources are that you need to be most effective in your job, your supervisor can help you with those things. But they can only help if they know. And so I guess my encouragement is to not be afraid of that conversation, and to instead embrace the conversation with your supervisor about what you think you need to be effective in your current role, as well as what you might want to do in the future. And they can be your advocate, they can be your sponsor, they can get you into those programs or activities, but most importantly, want you to be successful. I take my role as a supervisor really seriously, and I think about supervision from the perspective of it's my role as the supervisor to be flexible with the folks that work with me so that they're getting what they need as much as I'm getting what I need. And that certainly works differently for each person. But the truth is that it is a two-way street. So I'm going to stop talking. I did more talking than I intended. It always works that way. But I want to open it up for questions and comments, thoughts, reflections, any of those things. Surely, I did not put you to sleep or cause you to not have any thoughts or reflections. Yeah, Joyce.
I'll have one. When I was younger, which was a while back, and I had my first or second job, I had and I was in the academic world, I had a leader, department chair, that at the time I didn't see believed in me the way that now I look back and see that she did. And I think as we get older and we become in supervisor positions, that we're able to assess the gifts we had from earlier supervisors that really make an impact on your skills later. And, you know, not too long ago, I wrote her a letter and I just said, thank you. You know, at that time I didn't realize how much you believed in me and how you molded me and what it's meant to me. But I think as we grow older and hopefully wiser, when we become in supervisor roles, that we can look back and we can identify with some of our staff and where they are and the things that we need to do to advocate for them
Sure.
at that point in their job or career or whatever.
Sure.
So that's just an insight on my part.
Yeah, no, and what a great gift to give to that person, to say back to them what they meant to you in terms of that role. I think the supervisor relationship, you know, I've learned as much from supervisors who gave me tough love as I did the supervisors who were always sort of lifting me up. And I think there is a balance there. We all have room for improvement. If we were all perfect at our jobs, I don't even know what that would look like, because you know, there's always an opportunity to grow. And the best relationships that I've had with supervisors are those where I feel supported, cared about, and challenged. And those three things sometimes don't always feel the same. So when you are being challenged, that doesn't necessarily make you feel supported in that moment. But the reality is that the relationship can't all be about each other telling one another how great you are. It also has to be about how, as a group, as a team, as a partnership, how we can improve. What else? Thoughts, questions? Surely something else. Thank you.
You can also learn from bad experiences too.
Mm-hmm.
And you can learn how you don't want to be by having a supervisor that is not supportive and not a good supervisor.
Absolutely, absolutely. I absolutely believe that we learn from the experiences where we were hurt or weren't supported in the way that we needed as much as we do the others. Yes? Of course, of course.
Truly though, I would be curious what you would have to say for those that maybe when you ask for feedback, that higher up does not, oh, everything's fine, you know, and this is something I've heard from several other people just in general asking that, and I've never really known what to say, so.
Yeah. Well, at some level, I think you take the person for their word, that everything is fine, that they're happy with your performance, that you should carry on. I am internally motivated, and so to hear everything's fine, to me, is an invitation for creativity, which is, okay, awesome, I'm glad everything's fine, I'm gonna keep doing that, and then I'm also going to think about how I can be better. And then when you have the conversation again, if everything's fine, you know it worked, and if it's not, then that person will give you feedback. But I think it's also good, I think feedback loops are good in general, and so if you have a colleague in your department that you trust, for your friend, if your friend has a colleague that he or she trusts, who has the ability to observe the work the person is doing, and you feel comfortable in a feedback loop with that person, that's the place where you can really know how you can grow. The other bit of advice is, I think you can also say back to your supervisor, if you can ask the question in a more specific way, So we tend to start with the general, how's everything going? And I would probably say, it's fine, it's great, it's awesome. But if you dig into that a little more with some other questions like that, the program report that I provided to you last week, was that in the format that you wanted? Did I describe those whatevers as you wanted me to? You know, try to unpack based on the places that you're really trying to get feedback in. The general invitational question of how's everything going tends to get a general response. I hope that will be helpful for your friend. You bet. What else? I don't intend to beat a dead horse, so to speak, but let me just look at my notes one quick time to make sure I hit on everything I intended to, and I believe I did. Daryl, was there anything that I missed from our conversations?
I don't think so. I think you did a great job.
Thank you. I did see a note that I will just mention real quick. You know, sometimes people say things like, I don't know how to say no. Has anyone ever said that about themselves? Like, I take on too much, I don't know how to say no. I think we all say that to varying degrees and in different parts of our lives. I think in the relationship that you have with your supervisor, not that it's okay to say no, that is not advice that I'm giving here, but instead, what it is okay to do is to say, these are the things I've been working on, and I'm really glad to take this on. That's probably gonna mean that I'm gonna have to reprioritize something over here, and maybe it's gonna take me another 2 weeks to get done, or whatever the issue, you know, timeline might be. I think that's absolutely acceptable. And if that other thing is really important to your supervisor, he or she is likely to say, you know what, no, keep working on X, Y can wait. So it's not about saying no, please hear me in that vein, but it is about reframing that a little bit, because we all have priorities. And it is important to recognize that sometimes stuff comes up, and that stuff is the priority. And so it's really healthy to have a conversation to say, we're gonna have to shuffle some things around in order for me to do that. And then there's also the pushback that you might get from your supervisor to say, actually, no, you're going to have to do all of this in the time frame that I've given you. And in which case, I think depending on your relationship, you know, you can certainly say things like, I might need a little help, I might need to get a student assistant to help me do this, or whatever the help is that you might need. And again, that's not being, what's the word for it? Difficult to get along with. It's not being any of those things. I think it's being realistic. And then there's also the reality that maybe your supervisor thinks that your plate isn't full and that you could manage some other things. And the excitement of that, of course, is that your supervisor, you know, has trust in you to be able to do those things. And then the reality of, okay, how am I going to make that work in the context of the other things that I have going on? So I just invite you to have, I guess, trust in your supervisors enough that you could have the conversation. Those of you who feel like you can't, maybe there's some signal that they've given to you in the past that says that that's not a welcomed conversation. But maybe you've never had the conversation, and so I encourage you to at least give it a try. So that was really the last thing. So thank you all for coming out today. Stay dry.